continuing on with the question of what does a marine biologist do, and this is not in general, we're trying to look at what you would do in a day on the job. So some marine biologists work in husbandry, typically aquarists, or if you work at an aquarium, you'll work a lot with animal husbandry and animal ecology. So animal husbandry is care of different life forms, basically. And what you do is you're in charge of providing the habitat. So for most marine biologists, that is tanks or fish tanks or whatever is most relevant to the organism that you're keeping. At an aquarium, basically you are responsible for a set of exhibits and a set of tanks. And then your duties include making sure that all of the pumps and filters and what is generally called life support, all the things that keep the tank going, like lights and heaters and or sometimes chillers, are all working properly. So you always want to make sure all of those are working properly, and then you want to maintain the health of the exhibit. So a lot of husbandry work is cleaning fish tanks. So you're scrubbing windows, you're siphoning out sand. Um, I'll go over like what my day was like at the aquarium, and this is by no means universal. So I would come to the aquarium. You show up, and then usually the first thing you do is you're gonna feed everyone. So I think my boss and I were responsible for like 11 exhibits, something like that. So you would go to the freezer and then pull out all the different foods that you need to feed. And for the aquarium I worked at, that was mysis shrimp. So there are these blocks of like frozen mysis shrimp, and you would break off as much as you needed for your exhibits, and then you would put them in a big metal dish and let them thaw out. And then you would get gel food. So it's like an algae and different like fish and squid all chopped up and mixed into these weird jelly blocks. It's like really gross jello. And you would chop that up and you would throw it all into another metal dish. And then we would take flake food, like what you typically think of as fish food, and put that into another dish. And then we get special foods prepped, and those are the fun ones. Special foods were like if you're going to feed the octopus and you have to go and get a shrimp or squid, or if you're feeding the sharks that day, then you go and you get like 6 pounds of squid and like 6 pounds of fish, and you get all of those ready to feed to the sharks and the squids, or sorry, the sharks and the octopus, and yeah, all the kind of exciting animals to feed. Then from there, you go around and you do your feeding. So you just feed the appropriate amount to each of the tanks, and then you get to go to special foods. So some of the animals have special diet requirements, like some of the marine angelfish and some of the kind of fussier species. You would need to add different supplements to it. So some would need like a little bit of garlic added to their food. Some needed, it was a special enzyme. So certain fishes eat like sea sponges and sea anemones, and you add those enzymes from those organisms into the food that they're already eating and then feed it to them to make sure that they get their full diet and dietary needs met. After that, it was mostly cleaning tanks. So it was sometimes I got to jump in the tanks, which is kind of fun because you get to jump in the tank and like scrub the window and like sometimes wave at people. And then a big part of it was siphoning at the bottom of the tank. So you have like this big long tube and you stick it into the sand, and then you let it suck up all of like the old food that the fishes didn't eat, and like fish poop and any kind of detritus that just accumulates, like everything gross in the sand. You suck it all up and you make sure that the tank is nice and pretty. That was like 90% of your day is spent doing that. It's 10% doing some like where the magic happens. Sometimes that was raising new animals. So when our seahorses would give birth, I got to do that. Like I got to raise baby seahorses at the aquarium. That's where I got started with it. That 10% of your day might also include like learning how to medicate and treat new fishes. So sometimes we got to do fish surgery or like a tumor removal or give animals that were sick injections. Then some of it was also spent training animals. So I actually got to train a fish. One of my favorite fishes, cujo, and you can train them. So that's like the 10% of your day where you get to do things that you think are going to benefit the animals or benefit the exhibit or the aquarium in general, and go for it. So that's kind of what animal husbandry looks like. I say 90% of your day is spent feeding and cleaning everything. 10% is where the magic happens, where you get to experiment with new ideas. Animal husbandry is really fun, but it does require strong sense of responsibility. Because when this is something that does bother me a lot with animal husbandry is when people do not assume responsibility for their exhibits as they should. Because especially at like a public aquarium, when you bring an animal into that facility, it is your responsibility to keep it alive and do everything you can to enrich and help it have a good life. And sometimes if people made mistakes with animal husbandry, they would try and blame the animal or say it was something out of their control when it clearly was something that they were responsible for. And I strongly feel like to the point where if I saw something that upset me, it would make me cry, that when you're responsible for life, you need to do everything you can to take care of it in the best way possible. And if you neglect that responsibility, you shouldn't be in the field. Just period. If you cannot understand that when you take an animal out of the wild for a specific purpose, like with education-based aquariums, to show the public and the world, this is what this animal is like. This is what its life is like. Watch it, observe it, learn from it. Like, ask questions, like find new questions that you want to answer so we can expand our knowledge of this animal, of this species, of its habitat. That's what you should be doing. And if you can't do that, get out of the field. So don't get into animal husbandry or work at an aquarium if you just think it would be cool to jump in tanks or to train animals. That's the wrong reason. Do it because you want to care for life and you want the opportunity to study and understand those animals and replicate their habitat and learn how they're supposed to act. You want to observe them in nature, you want to observe them in captivity. Look at the similarities, look at the differences. Ask your questions, find ways to answer those questions, expand what we know about the species. The more we know, the better off we are, the better off the animals are. So that is my take on animal husbandry and marine